So yesterday I uploaded a video talking about UFC 300 and how I am a bit disappointed with the announcements that we have got so far, just because my expectations for this card are sky high. I think that UFC 300 could and should be the biggest UFC card of all time. It's a major milestone. It's UFC 300. It's just a cool number. UFC 100 was pretty good. UFC 200 would have been better if John Jones showed up. And then UFC 300, I'm hoping it's going to be huge. I think it's going to be massive. So in this video, I've actually made the UFC 300 card that I'm thinking of and that I'm envisioning with what I would do if I had the ability to make the card with what the UFC has and what the UFC has available. This is a realistic card. This is a card that could get done, and I probably will have to elaborate quite a bit with the decisions that I've made when I have made this card, especially when it does come down to the main event, because the main event for UFC 300 is completely up in the air. And the reason why I've gone with the event, the fight that I've gone with, is for like a lot of reasons, really. So I'm just going to get into that right now. The main event for UFC 300, the choice that I have made, involves Alex Pereira. Let's capitalize on Alex Pereira's stardom, but he's going to be taking on the former champion, Jamahal Hill. Now, yes, I understand this isn't the biggest fight you could do. There was rumors of Tom Aspinall taking on Alex Pereira. Tom Aspinall recently come out and said that Alex Pereira wants to defend his belt in his own weight class. I think that makes sense. He just got the belt. Let's have him defend it against the guy who originally vacated it in Jamahal Hill. I think this is the fight to make. Is it the fight to make in the UFC 300 main event? Maybe, maybe not. Now, Israel Adesanya is rumored to come back on this card, and if he is to do a massive comeback, he would have to be the headliner. It would have to be Adesanya taking on the winner of Duplessis and Strickland. But there's two major reasons why I think that the UFC wouldn't do that for the headliner of UFC 300. Firstly, there's no way the UFC wants Sean Strickland headlining UFC 300. He would bring a lot of bad press to what is going to be an absolute milestone of an event. And then secondly, I don't think they want Dricus Du Plessis and Israel Adesanya headlining UFC 300 because the feud that they have does bring up a relatively sensitive topic. And this is going to be a card with a lot of new eyes on it. A lot of people that don't normally watch the UFC will have their eyes on it. And I think that could be a turn-off for the more casual viewer, for the people that aren't into MMA. I don't think they're going to do Adesanya versus the winner of Du Plessis and Strickland. I'm pretty confident if they're going to do that, that'll be a UFC 301 move, maybe UFC 302, something along those lines. I'm not expecting it to be on this card. So the headliner that I have gone with is Alex Pereira versus Jamahal Hill. A massive matchup. I mean, Alex Pereira is one of the biggest names in the sport. He's a massive name in kickboxing, so you're going to bring over a lot of those fans from kickboxing that may not watch MMA to come and watch this event because it's a monumental event and also because it is Alex Pereira. Just people will love Alex Pereira. Alex Pereira is a massive name. Jamahal Hill isn't the biggest name in the world, but of course he is a former champion. He did beat Glover Teixeira to get the belt. He never really lost the belt. He just vacated it. So I think the honorable thing to do would just be for Alex Pereira to fight Hill. UFC 300 main event. Is it big enough? Maybe not, but I feel like we're not trying to sell the card on one main event alone. We're trying to sell it on the whole thing. And you'll see what I mean when we get down the card. We've got Leon Edwards taking on Bilal Muhammad. A fight we've talked about before. A fight I won't get into a little bit too much. So let's just move on to the next one. ESPN is owned by Disney. So of course you're going to have a women's MMA fight on the main card. Why not just make it a really, really good title fight? Zhang Weili taking on Yan Xiaonan. I wish this fight was in China. If they do it on UFC 300, I would consider it a missed opportunity to put on a massive event in Shanghai, in China. But hey, I'm not going to complain if they put it on UFC 300 because we know there's probably going to be a women's title fight on this card. I think Zhang Weili versus Yan Xiaonan is the best one you can do. Zhang Weili already has a pretty big name. She's got a pretty exciting fighting style. She can wrestle, which can make her fights not so great, but on the feet, she's put on some bangers. And Yan Xiaonan is a really, really good striker. Coming off that knockout win over Jessica Andrade, she's going to be a threat on the feet to Zhang Weili. This is a fight that will get people talking. This is a fight that could potentially be a really, really good matchup. A really, really good fight. That's why I've got it here as the featured fight of the night. And then as the fourth fight from the top, I'm bringing back another champion. Yes, I am doing 4 title fights on this card. And yes, It is possible for the UFC to do this. They haven't done 4 title fights in my memory. I know they've done 3, but this is UFC 300 we're talking about. I've got Alejandro Pantoja making a relatively quick turnaround, taking on a guy that's going to be making an even quicker turnaround, Manel Kape. Now, you could say, why not do Brandon Moreno? This card is booked for April. Brandon Moreno is going to be fighting in late February. He will have to fight 5 weeks after fighting Amir Albazi to make this card. Manel Kape is fighting in early January. Manel Kape is a pretty fun fighter. He's a pretty fun name. He's going to do a lot in the press conference. And when you see this fight here, this fight is going to stir up the press conference big time. But it's a major if they can do it. So let's just talk about the championship fights that I've got here real quick. Alejandro Pantoja coming back. Pantoja versus Kape. That fight could not headline its own pay-per-view. The fight with Yan Xiaonan and Zhang Weili could not headline its own pay-per-view. It'll be a co-main event to a pay-per-view anyways. So why not just make them featured fights of this massive pay-per-view here? And then you've got champions like Dricus du Plessis or Sean Strickland to headline at UFC 301. You've also got the bantamweight champion. You've got the women's bantamweight champion that's going to be crowned at 297, which could fight on another card with maybe another big name headliner. The point is, you can do 4 championship fights because I am excluding some champions that will be able to fight on different cards. And fighters like Leon Edwards and Pantoja have said that they want to be active in this year. So why not do this? Why not do this fight? I'm pretty excited for it. The next fight, this is pretty unrealistic, but it could happen, and it would be, if they could do this, it would be unreal. It truly would be. I have 2 fighters coming back from the UFC that have left the UFC. The first one is Nate Diaz. The second one is Jorge Masvidal. You might be looking at me and thinking, Artem, that's just really stupid. And I understand it could be dumb, but I'm going to sell you on this matchup. The first reason why it would be great is these 2 have fought before. They fought for the BMF belt. Maybe you could bring it back. I think that would be a little bit cringy, especially when Gaethje's got it. But they fought for the BMF belt before, the original one. It was a great fight. It ended due to TKO, due to the doctor stepping in. So we never really got the definitive answer because Nate Diaz was starting to have success in that matchup. And more importantly, both Jorge Masvidal and Nate Diaz both have beef with Leon Edwards. This would make the press conference very interesting because Leon Edwards would be going at it with both Nate Diaz and Jorge Masvidal. You would get a good press conference, and you might even get a little bit coming out of Manel Kape as well, because Manel Kape will probably chirp up and start talking to Masvidal and Diaz. This would be a good card. This would be a good press conference. And yes, I think that you wouldn't even do a 5-fight main card. I think for UFC 300, we're probably going to get a 6 or 7-fight main card. Let me know what you think of that one in the comments, but this is my 5 fights that I would do if I was the UFC. Jorge Masvidal, you could bring Jorge Masvidal back if you paid him enough. You could bring Nate Diaz back if you paid him enough as well. Nate Diaz wants to fight. Jorge Masvidal maybe wants to fight. He probably needs money. Everyone needs a bit of money, right? Let's just do this. I think this would work. I think you could do it. I think the beef between Leon Edwards and Jorge Masvidal and Nate Diaz would sell a lot more pay-per-views than not having them on the card. The name value on this card is good. The championship belts on this card is good as well. A lot of casual fans, even if they are unfamiliar with the smaller named fighters that are on this card, I would consider Pantoja, although he's a champion, being a guy that a lot of casual fans don't know about. They will still see it's a title fight and get excited. You know what I mean? They'll see Bahia, they'll get excited. They'll see Leon Edwards versus Bilal Muhammad, they probably won't get that excited. But it's still a big fight, right? I think this is realistic. This is a realistic card for UFC 300, maybe minus Masvidal versus Diaz. But if they were to do it, you could even maybe sell them on the idea that the winner would fight Leon Edwards next because, as I said, Leon Edwards has unfinished business with Jorge Masvidal. He doesn't have unfinished business with Nate Diaz as he did beat him up for 5 rounds. But a lot of people seem to think that Nate Diaz had a lot of success in that matchup and would like to see them fight again. You could sell us on that idea. Maybe. And then for my featured prelim, which would probably still be on a main card anyway, as I do think this is going to be a longer than 5-fight main card. Max Holloway moving up to 155 pounds and taking on Dustin Poirier. Max Holloway versus Justin Gaethje for the BMF belt has been a title fight or a BMF title fight, or a fight that has been floating around for a very, very long time, I think Justin Gaethje is going to get the title shot against Islam Makhachev. His name just slipped my mind for a second. I think Gaethje's going to fight Makhachev, and it's going to leave Poirier with no real opponent aside from Oliveira or Arman Tsarukyan. And we all know for a fact that Dustin Poirier will never, ever fight Arman Tsarukyan because he just doesn't want to fight up-and-comers for some reason. This eliminates kind of both of it. Max Holloway doesn't really have a clear-cut matchup at 145 anymore. Now, if Ilia Topuria beats Volkanovski, Holloway versus Topuria is the fight to make. If that doesn't happen, though, why not bring Holloway up to 155, tell her to rematch Dustin Poirier, because these two have fought before. They fought to a decision. It was a fun fight. You could do it again. 5 rounds, maybe 3 rounds. I think it's a good fight to make. I think it's a fight that does make a little bit of sense. It doesn't make a lot of sense, but I think it is a matchup that you could sell the fans on for sure, because Holloway is a big name, and then Poirier is a massive name as well. And we know that Poirier is not going to fight a lot of these up-and-coming guys. He's not going to fight Mateusz Gamrot. He's not going to fight Arman Tsarukyan. He probably would fight Max Holloway, though. And then you got a fight that's already been announced. Former champion taking on Yuri Prochazka and Alexander Rakic. This could have been a title fight a very, very long time ago when Yuri was the champion and then Rakic got injured when he was taking on Jan. If things were a little bit different, these two would have been fighting for the title, maybe even on this card, but things just didn't work out in that way. So I've gone ahead and just put the matchup that the UFC put together. And now I've got another one that I'm going to have to sell you guys on. Nick Diaz is not retired. To my knowledge, anyway. Maybe he is, maybe he isn't, but I'm pretty confident he's still under contract with the UFC. I'm pretty sure he's still got a few more fights left in the UFC. Now, Nick Diaz has already done a lot for the promotion, so I'm sure if he just wanted to walk away, the UFC would as well. But I've got him taking on a winnable fight against someone that many people think is retired. But as of May 2022, so about a year ago, he said he is not retired and is waiting for a fight to retire on. And that is none other than Damian Maia. Damian Maia versus Nick Diaz is a fight that makes sense to me. When you do look into Nick Diaz, especially when he was making his return against Robbie Lawler, I could tell that I felt like he had lost his love for MMA, but he still had a love for jiu-jitsu. And Damian Maia is that jiu-jitsu guy. And Damian Maia is also an older guy. Damian Maia is 43 years old. He is not a young guy at all. In fact, this is almost like, this is a really, really, I mean, these guys are beyond their prime at this point. But as I said, they are not retired. Damian Maia had a Luke Thomas interview in May 2022 where he said he is not retired and he wants one more fight to go out on. What better fight to go out on than a matchup against Nick Diaz, another older guy, a winnable fight for Nick Diaz. I mean, if Damian Maia hasn't been doing any striking whatsoever, we know Nick Diaz still does have some boxing. We know that Nick Diaz still has grappling in his own right. It might be a little bit of a sloppy matchup, but if you just do this fight at middleweight, I think it would be a good send-off for both guys. Both guys fighting at UFC 300. I think you could sell a lot of people on this matchup. Another matchup I was thinking of was Nick Diaz taking on Lyman Good, because Lyman Good is also 38 years old. He hasn't fought since 2020, and he's going to be fighting in 2024, apparently, in the UFC, according to him. So, we'll see. I mean, that's the fight that I made. I understand that you might have to get sold on it a little bit, but I think it's a good send-off for Nick Diaz, and I think it does make sense. Then you've got Kattar taking on Aljamain Sterling. A good fight, of course. I mean, Aljamain Sterling's first fight at 145. If he beats Kattar, he's probably one fight away from the title shot. In fact, he might even fight Max Holloway. Now we can move on. We have the next matchup. Okay, once again, ESPN is owned by Disney. So we're going to have women's MMA fights on the card. I've gone ahead and done a top 10 matchup in the best women's weight class, women's strawweight. It's Mackenzie Dern, who is ranked number 8, taking on Amanda Ribas, who is ranked number 9. This would be a really good fight. Like, in the fight, I mean, both of them aren't really the best strikers, but both are good grapplers. Amanda Ribas has a pretty fun style on the feet where she is a little bit kill or be killed. We know that Mackenzie Dern's striking isn't that good, even though she looked really good on the feet against Angela Hill. It just doesn't make sense. But we could see a lot go on here. We could see Ribas get a KO. We could see Dern get a submission. I think it would just be a fun fight. I think a lot of people would like to see this fight for probably a different reason, but The main reason why it is on this card is it is a top 10 fight in the best women's weight class, which is women's strawweight. I think it's a good fight to make. And then another one is Derek Lewis being on this card, because you've got to have a heavyweight, at least one, on the card in a really, really good fight. Because this is Derek Lewis versus Jairzinho Rozenstruik. We're finally doing it. Two guys that have one punch power, two guys that are good strikers, two guys that are willing to go out there and brawl. I mean, Lewis has shown that he can be a little bit tentative at times, taking on another very high power guy. So is Rozenstruik, I guess. But you put these two in the octagon together, 90% of the time, someone is going to get knocked out. That's a banger prelim. Derek Lewis is a big name. Rozenstruik, not so much, but he's got some crazy highlights he could put on the screen and people would get really, really excited. That's a fight that I think you could make. And then Jim Miller, we all know Jim Miller's going to be on the card. The opponent I have chosen for him, I think, is quite appropriate. It's Joe Lauzon. Joe Lauzon, again, isn't retired. I don't think he has fought again since 2020 or 2021. He was meant to fight Donald Cerrone. I think he pulled out or something along those lines happened. But Joe Lauzon is still on the roster. He's an older guy. He's a guy that's been in the UFC for so long. He was on The Ultimate Fighter. He beat Jens Pulver way back in the day. Like, this is a long time ago. He beat Jens Pulver and then ended up on The Ultimate Fighter with Jens Pulver being the opposition's coach, because I think he was on BJ Penn's team when he was on Tough. But Joe Lauzon has been there, done that. What better way than to send him off as well on the UFC 300 card? I didn't want to make UFC 300 a retirement home of sorts, and I kind of may have done that, but I think these are good fights. So you got Nick Diaz on there for the name value, and also I guess maybe like the anticipation for how he's going to look. You've got Jim Miller on there because Jim Miller has to be on that card, and then that's it. I mean, I guess Bonacool versus Cody Brundage is on there, but shame on the UFC. Shame on the UFC for doing that card on UFC 300. Sorry, that fight. That is horrific. That is absolutely disgusting. If you're going to do Bonacool on this card, do him versus Abus Magomedov. Do him versus Ikram Aliskerov. Do him versus Caio Borralho. Do him versus Nursultan Ruzaboev. You could even do him. I'm going to lose my mind. Anyway, I'm going to leave it there. Let me know what you think of this card. Is it realistic? I'm pretty sure it is. I mean, it makes a lot of sense to me. I mean, as I said, these flyweight title fight, it couldn't headline the flyweight title fight I'm talking about here. It could not headline a standalone card by itself. Put it on the feature. Zhang Weili versus Yan Xiaonan could not headline a pay-per-view by itself either. So that makes sense as a little bit of a bonus fight, I guess, or a featured fight on the card. I think this is a card that makes sense. I think it's a card that people would get excited about. This is what I'm expecting out of UFC 300. I do understand I would have missed some massive names. I know there's probably a lot of fighters out there that people want to see on this card. This is what I've gone ahead and done. Let me know if you think I've forgotten anybody in the comments below. And I'll see you guys in the next video. Thank you guys so much for watching.